Hello and welcome to the Fellowship Phase, an Adventures in Middle-earth podcast. I'm Josh and that's Callum. We're going to give you inside information on how to find your own path through Tolkien's world.
These are not troll make. They are old swords, very old swords, of the high elves of the west, my kin. They were made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars. They must have come from a dragon's horde, or goblin plunder, for dragons and goblins destroyed that city many years ago. This, Thorin, the rune's name Orcrist, the goblin cleaver in the ancient tongue of Gondolin. It was a famous blade. This, Gandalf, was Glamdring, bow hammer that the king of Gondolin once wore. Keep them well.
Hello, Elrond.
I wish. Hello, Josh.
That was an excellent thespian introduction from Elrond, from one of my favourite bits of The Hobbit. What a pleasing start to this episode.
I read that chapter again. It's so short. That's what was surprising me going back to The Hobbit. And The Lord of the Rings is so much richness and description. In The Hobbit, it's like, and they went to Rivendell, and they're gone.
All of the kind of qualities that you think of Tolkien's writing, of long, rich, languorous prose and spending pages describing a song or a bit of lore, don't really exist in The Hobbit. That's all from Lord of the Rings. The Hobbit is very like bam, 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 move the plot forward, drama, resolution, just constantly.
Like a Hobbit level writing version of Lord of the Rings.
Yes. Yes.
Because I feel like The Hobbit I could read to a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And maybe engage them enough for them to listen. Maybe. I
think that's probably why I like it.
It would be very hard. Yeah. But
I actually think this passage is a good example of Tolkien. What we then know of Lord of the Rings, though, is that whilst it's quite snappy from Elrond, it kind of pulls the veil back slightly. And says, oh, yeah, this is kind of a kid's story with a lot of forward momentum. You found some swords, they're cool. But by the way, there's this 1,000-year-old history, which I'll just give a nod to with Gondolin and what happened there. And then we'll just move on. I will not reference Gondolin again in the rest of The Hobbit.
I feel like I read something that Gondolin was one of the first stories that Tolkien wrote. I feel like James is going to, when he listens to this in the near future, text me and correct or affirm that claim.
Well, James, rather than texting us, remember that you can email us at thefellowshipphase@gmail.com with any questions.
Yeah, and if you also happen to be called James, not the James that we had to guess, please email us. Any emails from any James are welcome. Or if your name is James. So, what are we talking about today?
We're talking not about Elrond, but about magical items of lore and of wonder and history, and mechanically how they work in RPGs around Middle-earth. So I know that you've got the rules at your fingertips. We can talk through a bit about how they work in the different editions.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the rules work in Adventures in Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings RPG, and then we'll delve into some examples from our game and also from the sort of the films or the books. And I think that starting passage really sells, like, having these magic weapons and giving them to your players is so cool. That's one of the best bits about any role-playing game.
Yes.
I think, but particularly in this. So coming up with weapons or artifacts that are interesting to your players is really key. And there's a really interesting bit actually in the book, and I don't know if it's in AiME, but it's certainly in the Lord of the Rings RPG, and they say, fate and predestination. The creation of custom special items to be found amongst treasure is meant to represent predestination, the potential of the hero to become the instrument of a higher purpose and to play a role in the long-term development of a campaign. And they just talk about that it should be individual. So don't feel like it's, artificial to create a weapon that's perfect for your treasure hunter.
Yeah.
No, that's what it's all about. You really be thinking when you're making these weapons, who's this going to be for? And then design it with that in mind. I haven't always done that because I'm not sure about it initially, but more and more I think actually that's fair enough. So there's a couple of things we'll talk about Maybe we'll go with AiME first, just because the Adventures of Middle-earth, just because that's where we've been playing and have more familiarity. And there's two things I want to talk about. One is wondrous items, and then the other is legendary weapons and armor. So wondrous items, first of all, so that's on page 126 of the Lore Master's Guide, and it essentially is items that possess characteristics that mortals wouldn't hesitate to call magical. So that's things like the cloaks that the Fellowship get in Lorien.
Okay.
Is a good example. So it's something that gives them a benefit to hiding. So that example where Frodo and Sam in the film fall on the rock face and they're hidden by from the Easterling soldiers.
Yes.
And that is essentially what you might call a magical result. That isn't something that you would expect to be able to do with any other cloak. There's a long introduction in the book about some examples and the underpinning of the rules, thinking about it. But in short, a wondrous artifact is something that has a blessing, an enchantment. And most artifacts have a single blessing, although some of them might have two blessings. And the rarest have a greater blessing. So if you think about number, like most basic is a single blessing. You can have two normal blessings. You could even have a greater blessing.
Okay.
What do they do? So a blessing gives a bonus to a single skill. So let's take that cloak that we mentioned again.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a cloak of Lorien and it had a blessing for stealth, then it would give you a bonus to your stealth skill, the same as your proficiency bonus.
Okay, got you. So it does scale up as your character scales up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's in addition to your proficiency, and even if your expertise, it's in addition to that. So you benefit from it no matter what your stealth was to start with.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's useful for every character. And it's actually sometimes more useful if you don't have proficiency, because we know that the usefulness of additions to skills, like mathematically, like having a +10 bonus to stealth isn't as useful as two people having +5. If that
diminishing
makes sense.
returns, yeah.
Yep. If you have a greater blessing, in addition to getting that sort of additional proficiency, essentially, you always have advantage on all ability checks made using the blessed skill. Regardless of circumstances and difficulties, they always retain advantage. Which, reading that makes me think that even if there's a source of disadvantage, you still get advantage. Which
feels like it kind of flips one of the core parts of 5th edition over.
Yeah, it's insane. So pretty powerful already, right? Yeah, you're getting a flat bonus to a skill. Skills of your proficiency could be a +4 bonus. That's huge. In addition, there's this thing called a magical result. And that's where Frodo and Sam hide from those soldiers who are right next to them.
Yes.
That is what I would say is a magical result. This is where you basically use the wondrous artifact to directly affect the outcome of an ability check. And this happens when you say to your player, I want you to make a stealth check. The player, so say Josh, you were the player, you would say that you want to use the wondrous artifact's ability to get the magical result. And mechanically, you have to spend inspiration. So remember, you have to be giving people inspiration out quite regularly for this to be possible. And you have to spend hit dice. So it's almost like using part of your willpower, your reserves, which is really interesting because hit dice most of the time are just something you pick up on a short or long rest. And I think it's not really a resource that's spent that often. Mm-hmm. There's other abilities in AiME they use hit dice. And I quite like that because it's like you're hampering yourself in the long term, particularly in something like AiME where you're more likely to be injured in long adventures and so on. So you can spend your inspiration and a variable number of hit dice in order to succeed at something impossible by turning a successful die roll made using the affected skill into a magical result. So you have to succeed on the roll first.
Yes.
For that example, Frodo and Sam, they had to roll a stealth check. They succeeded, and then they say, I want to use my inspiration and some of my hit dice to turn that affected result into a magical result. And that does something that surpasses all expectations, was beyond their normal capabilities. So it could only be accomplished by magical aid.
That's interesting because there are, throughout RPGs, magic is obviously makes up a huge bulk of kind of fantasy RPGs, which are probably the bulk of role-playing games. there are a lot of magical tables of magical effects, which are largely kind of random. So I'm thinking of Wild Magic table in kind of core 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which is a table where, depending on the dice roll, something randomly magical will happen. And it taps into that idea of magic being this separate force that exists, and it can have unpredictable results. They can be fun. We've played a number of games which have random magical tables, and it harks back to old school Renaissance traditional D&D of magic being random, which can have both massive benefits and massive downsides. It's interesting that in this, the player has an agency to effectively deploy when they want to get a it's not just random. It's not like, oh, when you're using the item and you roll a natural 20, therefore there's magic. It's that they can use it, which I think the random magic is fun, but sometimes it happens at innocuous times or doesn't happen at a really dramatic moment, and you can miss some of the narrative. So I like the idea that you can deploy it. I'm thinking of when Shelob's got Frodo, and then Sam uses the Phial of Galadriel with the Light of Elendil to scare Shelob away from Frodo, which I suppose if we were playing mechanically would be something like an intimidation check. He's trying to scare the giant spider away, which you would probably say is impossible. Tiny hobbit frightening away one of the most monstrous creatures of all Middle-earth. But by using a magical item, that feels, as a player, I'd be like, oh, I want to use a magical effect there to achieve this kind of heroic moment. So I like the rules.
Yeah, I think they've got a lot to offer. Just a small thing. It's the Light of Earandil. I don't know how you pronounce it, but that's Elrond's dad.
Oh, is it?
And obviously, I guess Elendil's great review answer. So he was the one who, I think, sails the ship over to ask for aid in the first day to get the Valar to come and fight Morgoth. And afterwards, he's in the sky and he sails forever in the stars.
And it's capturing the light of the star.
Yeah, the light is the Phial of Galadriel's the last light of the trees from Valinor. Massive lore. I mean,
strong lore drop. Great. But, yes, that's the kind of moment I'm thinking of where you as a player
is a good example
to have a heroic moment.
And it's not like that they take that all the time, and every time they take it out, it's wow, what amazing light. It clearly is a rare thing, and these rules are making you. There's a cost to doing it, so you're not going to do it all the time, because it wouldn't be in keeping of Tolkien, I think, to have magic out all the time. So I do like this implementation. When you go for a magical result, there's the lore master decides if it's a small, medium, or large effect that the player is going for. A small effect is 1 to 3 hit dice, and a large effect is 7 to 10. And then if you're trying to affect others, so say it was like Horn of Fear or something, intimidation, and the blessing was an intimidation, like say the Horn of Gondor potentially has a magical blessing. The number of targets, so the more people you target with that effect, the horn, you have to spend an extra hit dice for each target beyond the first.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, small effect might be like Boromir blows his horn and he causes the orcs to be frightened and pause. And then it might be like 4 hit dice for 4 orcs. A large effect might be like Boromir blows his horn and the Mumakil is frightened. That's going to have a bigger effect. And the rules say that the lore masters say, when I was running the game, I might say blowing that horn normally would be impossible to scare a Mumakil, because they're not going to be scared of something like that. So I might say before someone rolls as you can try and intimidate the Mumakil with your horn, but that would be usually impossible. So you would have to do it you'd have to get a magical result to succeed, and the player has to commit to doing that if they succeed. So there's this sort of the player, their character would understand what is and isn't possible within the world. So that makes sense. And there's also some saying that in large effects, if you're seeking to control others with your magical result, that the target, we get a saving throw with a difficulty class equal to the companion skill check result, which is always quite a nice way of doing it. Something I find that if you score like a 30 on intimidation, sometimes it's nice to say, okay, well, now it's more difficult for that enemy to succeed on, or if you just do like 15, then maybe it wasn't as intimidating. So that it kind of gives a there's a benefit there to getting a ridiculously high result, which is something that I always like struggle with a bit in D&D. I rolled a 45, and it doesn't matter, does it? It's just as good as just passing with 15 if DC is 14.
Yeah, the rules basically say you've just increased your chance of passing. You've not passed better than...
Yeah. I want to pass better, damn it.
A way you implemented that well, we've talked about on the podcast, was when we had the siege of Stonyford. One of the prep things we did was create traps, and to do it, you asked us to make skill checks, depending on what the trap was, to create them. And then you used our skill check success result as the DC for either noticing or escaping them, which was good because it felt like our successes or narrow successes really had an impact, which I really liked.
Those traps were good.
I find it interesting, the mechanic of using hit dice as part of this, because that is a pool of resources, because it is a resource that's not used that much in kind of 5th edition and its various iterations. And there are a couple of... I created a magical item which did. We'll maybe talk about that later. And there's also one in Critical Role. I won't spoil which one it is, but there's a magical item which has a kind of secret curse on it, which means when certain things happen, it uses hit dice, which the other players were unaware of. But if the character who had the item ever got to 0 hit dice, they would die permanently. And they knew that.
What? Which series was that in?
In the second series.
Oh, I didn't know that. You can just look it up if you want, if you're curious.
It's probably long enough that it doesn't really count as a spoiler anymore, but I loved it. I loved the idea of it being a resource that could be used more than just for healing. So it's good to see it being implemented here.
Very cool.
Okay, so that's how it works in AiME. What about looking then at Lord of the Rings RPG? What have they done with the rules there?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is quite different. It took me a bit of time to get my head around, because they, as we talked about in AiME rules, it's like they're all called wondrous items, and they can either have 1 or 2 blessings or a greater blessing. In this, they've decided that if it's got 1 blessing, it's a marvelous artifact, and if it's got 2 blessings, it's a wondrous item. I don't quite understand why they've named it differently, because it just makes it confusing. There's already a game with a lot of new terms. So if it was me, I would just kept them both as wondrous items and they have 1 or 2 blessings. I don't think any problem with that. And essentially in this, instead of it just being a flat proficiency bonus addition, like a flat number you add to a skill, it's the same idea that you have a marvelous artifact and it's got a blessing for stealth, say, but you get a blessing die. So you roll, when you make a skill check, you roll an additional die. And the die that you add depends on your proficiency bonus. So say your proficiency bonus is a +2, you get to add a D4 blessing die. If it's a +3, you get a D6. And if it's +4, you get a D8. And it doesn't get higher than +4 in Lord of the Rings RPG.
So there's no fixed value that it goes up by. It's not just like a +2 benefit throughout the game. Or even it's not just fixed to your proficiency bonus, like when you're +2, you get +2 bonus. It's actually... It varies. I suppose it's always a minimum of +1, because you can never lower than 1 on the die. But it's interesting. I suppose it plays into people's enjoyment of rolling.
Yeah, it's more dice, which I think is interesting. It's more complicated. There's a downside, but there's more variability. And a +D8 is huge. So yeah, I think that's fine. In addition to the dice, you can also do the magical success that they talked about before. In this, it's limited in number of times you can do it. So rather than spending hit dice, they just limited the number. You can use the marvelous artifact a number of times equal to half your proficiency bonus rounded down for a marvelous item, or a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus if it's a wondrous item. And then you have to do a long rest to regain unexpended uses. So say your proficiency bonus is 4, for example, then if you had a marvelous item, marvelous artifact, God, the names are confusing. Marvelous artifact, you could do a magical success twice. And if it's a wondrous item, you could do it 4 times before a long rest, which is quite a lot. And that's it. It doesn't really go into much more detail about what magical successes are. I might have just read this. I haven't actually used these rules, but page 129. Yeah, I think that's all it says.
So these Lord of the Rings RPG rules are... I describe them as crunchier. They feel more number oriented than the AiME rules. I mean, they're achieving a similar thing. I like the idea of being able to roll more dice. That's always a positive. What I don't like, and this goes right back to the very beginning of character creation in 5th edition, is ever having a modifier which is somehow a modification of another modifier, which I think just gives too many layers and numbers and makes it inaccessible. So here you've got proficiency bonus, which is already slightly awkward because it's linked to your level, but it's not the same as your level. And now you're adding it might be half of your proficiency bonus, which is related to, but not the same as your level.
This is confusing.
It is confusing. It's something that bothers me because I feel when I've introduced D&D to a number of players, and you sit down, you make a character sheet, and you're like, okay, we'll come up with your ability scores. People get that. You roll some dice, great. And then I'm like, and then these convert into different numbers. And that's it's one of the first things you do, and I think it annoys me because it's unnecessary step in my opinion. Anyway, that's just a personal bugbear.
Yeah, I prefer the way of just spending hit dice because it's like it inherently links it to your character's vitality and a resource you have to spend, where this seems a bit cheap to just be like, every long rest you can have 2 magical successes whenever you want. And also doesn't, and I may have missed this, but I did read these pages again before we recorded just to make sure I hadn't missed something. It doesn't to me really explain, like, in the Lord of the Rings RPG rules, what a magical success means. Like the AiME ones has quite a lot of like, you can only just rename it success, and this is what dramatic. It's missing that in the RPG rules, and maybe they'll add that later on a later supplement. Like for Adventures of Middle-earth, for example, and we'll come on to this when we talk about legendary weapons and armor. In the Rivendell region guide, they added a bit more depth to some of these rules. So maybe they'll do that later on. But yeah, I think I'm going to stick with the AiME rules for Wondrous items. I think it's simpler and I think it's better.
Okay. What about then if we turn our attention to legendary weapons and armor?
Yeah, so this is basically exactly the same in AiME and Lord of the Rings RPG. Even the wording and the layout of the steps to create a legendary weapon or armor is exactly the same. It's in page 132 of the Lore Master's Guide for AiME, and in the Lord of the Rings RPG book, it is page 130 of the main book, although in that it's called Famous Weapons and Armor, but for all intents and purposes, as far as I can read, it's exactly the same. So I'm just going to go through the AiME rules.
Quite a vote of confidence, really, isn't it? When you're designing a sort of a second or a new edition of a game and you pretty much lift the rules from the previous one, it's pretty much a way of saying, yep, these are good.
Yep, they're good. There's 5 steps, so I'll go through very quickly. 1, choose item type. 2, determine craftsmanship. 3, select Banes for Elven or Numenorian weapons only. 4, attribute enchanted qualities. And 5, name the item, which is So first of all, choose item type. Very simple. Is it a shield? Is it a mail shirt? Is it a sword? And you're going to do that based on what your players need, really. Determine craftsmanship. Again, quite simple. So the 3 options you get are Elven, Dwarven, or Numenorian. And you can even go beyond that and think about where they were done exactly. So Elven, you might say it's Elven from Gondolin, as we heard earlier on, or it might be one of the other years, or it might be from a region. You know, we've been watching Rings of Power recently, potentially. That could be quite a cool place to have something that was forged. And it gives you, in the AiME rules, it gives you some suggestions, like the elf sword forged many famous long swords, short swords, daggers, enchanted spears. So there's essentially nudging you towards things that people in the lore potentially did more. It might be a spear of the Lost Alliance, that'd be cool. Or one example is an axe. So in the Fall of Gondolin, Tolkien writes about one of the many groups of elves that are fought with axes. So that could be a quite cool, an elven axe. It's very unusual. Dwarven craftsmanship. So, is it from Nogrod or Belkos, one of the sort of ancient dwarven holds of Beleriand, or is it from Khazad-dûm? And they're more likely to make armor. And then Numenorian, so they might have put spells, strange weapons against particular evils. So that's number 2, determine craftsmanship. 3, select Banes. So Elven and Numenorian weapons can have Banes, and that really ties into the lore again. So the swords that the hobbits are given by Tom Bombadil in the Barrow Downs, he tells them that they were made by men. I'm not sure if he says Numenor or Western Essie or whatever he says, but against evil men, and they have essentially a bane of wights or the undead, the Barrow wights, essentially. And that's one of the reasons why when Mary stabs the Witch King, it's meant to have weakened him so that Eowyn can then kill him. So that's like an interesting, the rules here tie in. And you can choose a bane from orcs, trolls, wolves, evil men, or undead from the Numenorian weapons. And for the elven ones, you can say orcs, wolves, or spiders.
Which is how we would get to something like a spider slaying sword. Which,
well, yeah, if someone was to design that, that's how they would do it. You can decide yourself on other things. So you can be more specific or less specific. It's up to you how you want to build that. 4 is attribute enchanted qualities. And this is the coolest bit. So in the book, in the Lord of the Rings Lore Master Guide, and also there's more in the Rivendell Region Guide and the Lord of the Rings RPG book, they give you these lists of enchanted qualities. And it's so fun to make weapons, and that's the most fun bit. And I've made up some of my own ones occasionally, but there's loads of options. And you basically say it's got a special characteristics. And I'll go through some examples in a second. And you can have up to 3, they say. You don't want things to get overpowered. And I did once create a weapon that I, on retrospect, think might have been a bit overpowered. And then the 5th step is you name the item. So they give some examples like the necklace of Girion, the Arkenstone of Thrain, the Vial of Galadriel. You know, these are things. So you can make up your own, or you could create one that was in the lore and wasn't used. And you might decide, was this a weapon that people would know the name of as soon as they saw, or is this something that like you would need to go and see someone with the expertise in identifying weapons, like James's character Torvald had, or go to see Elrond? So that's what you do. Do you want me to talk you through some qualities?
Well, how about this? I like this idea. So let's kind of draft one, and then you could maybe pick some enchanted qualities that would work for it. So I liked what you mentioned about the axes of the Elves of Gondolin. So if the item type is an axe, that determine the craftsmanship. We're saying Elven from Gondolin. The bane for that would be, I'm trying to think of Gondolin. So what would they have fought? Orcs?
Mostly orcs. Yeah, I think so.
So we say, and effectively it's an orc slaying elven axe from Gondolin. If that's the item we're creating, what kind of enchanted qualities might we attribute to an orc slaying axe from Gondolin? What might fit in there?
Yeah, so well, there's some. I think you get inspiration from how you're thinking about the weapon is going to be used for. So one that you might use is something called cleaving. It can be applied to any weapon that's close combat. When you successfully hit your target with a weapon blessed by the enchanted quality, you automatically deal an additional amount of damage equal to your proficiency bonus to another enemy creature engaging in combat. Now, whose weapon had this? Somebody had cleaving.
I had cleaving with the spider killing sword. That was which you'd created using these rules.
Right.
It was called Torel, the spider killing sword, and you could you cleaved with it, and the added, I think it was probably a +2 when I was using the weapon. It was great. It was so flavorful. It meant I really wanted to get stuck right into combat with multiple enemies, which I think is what it's for, to encourage you to attack kind of groups of enemies. And it was great against very low powered enemies, kind of mooks who you were attacking loads of, because sometimes you could actually like kill 2 in one go, it felt so heroic.
Yeah, I love cleaving. That's why I did a few things. Maybe another thing, I imagine this axe going in and it's like really effective, swiping through like that way the elvens are elegant fighting styles. Yes. They're attacking multiple enemies at once. So maybe foe slaying is something else that you could give to it. And it says when you attack a bane creature, it extends the critical range of your weapon by a number equal to half your proficiency bonus. So quite a complicated rule. But for example, you had this axe and you're level 8. Your proficiency bonus is +3, so you extend your critical range by +2 because it's half rounded up. So that'd be amazing. So you get a critical hit on an 18, 19, or 20 on the die.
That'd be brilliant.
That's crazy.
Tripled your chances there.
So you can make some really powerful weapons. And just to run through this pages of suggestions. So there's ones for armor to increase your AC or to wave critical hits. There's one for range weapons. There's ones that cause fear, make you more likely to hit. There's one very cool one, which I think Brendan's character had, Flame of Hope. You may take an action to hold a weapon of its enchanted quality aloft or simply brandish it to rally your comrades. All your allies are within 30 feet. Lose the fighting conditions, get +1d6 plus your proficiency bonus and hit points, and gain inspiration. You must take a long rest before you invoke this ability again. He did that at such a clutch moment.
It was incredible.
Stony Ford. It was so awesome as a role-playing moment. And yeah, there's lots and lots of options. The Rivendell region guide adds even more. And I think this is one of the bits of AiME that is done so well. And obviously, Lord of the Rings RPG fought the same because they basically replicated it and popped it into the rules.
I love these rules. We've used them well in the game. The magical items that you've given us or you've allowed us to uncover have been absolutely brilliant. The spider slaying sword was cool in that it had an added effect, Bane against spiders, which was helpful because both me as a human being and Halmir as my character terrified of spiders. The cleaving effect was good as well because actually we didn't fight spiders that often, and it meant that the weapon had a low level benefit above a normal weapon all the time, which was cool. Something I really like, and we've spoken about this before, is the kind of very premise of a lot of fantastical worlds is that there is a history in them, and that the fun of exploring the story or the adventure, however you're doing it, is seeing the history. Now, a classic example being like, oh, you found a dungeon or you found a tomb, therefore you're finding a bit about what happened in the past. That's massive in Tolkien's world, and the weapons are a great example of that. The very fact that you're able to say, where was the craftsmanship from, what's the name, who are we linking them to, it's a great way of grounding the characters we create in the world of Tolkien that you're running, and say, oh wow, this is an item that is linked to that famous person who, as players, we've heard of. Maybe our characters haven't until that point, and it gets to open up a bit of lore about them, learning about Gondolin or learning about Lorien.
It's really cool. And you can also drip feed that. So there's rules in AiME and in Lord of the Rings RPG about how to discover the qualities. So as we did with the weapons in our game, you don't get all the abilities at first. So if you're a low-level character, you might only get one ability. And as you level up, you are able to unlock more abilities. And what I tend to do is, like, say you hit with natural 20, you might discover that new ability, or they say that you can make it active. So you might say you hit, and then I might say something like roll an extra d4, and then that adds on to the damage. But you don't understand what activates that until you go see a lore master and they tell you about the weapon. So you can uncover slowly. I think that's how. I'm trying to think of examples of that in the lore. You know, I guess the gifts that Galadriel give, it wasn't particularly clear to all of the Fellowship exactly how and when they might need to use that, but all of them were really important going forward.
Yeah, which comes back to that kind of predetermination type thing of
yeah,
you are fated to use it, or is it the other way around that you use it? It becomes important because you have it, either one way or the other. You make it important through its use. No, I love it. I love the rules. They are definitely some of the best, most flavorful in AiME. It makes sense they've been carried forward. We've made great use of them in our game, or as players, we've enjoyed them, and you've made great use of them as a lore master.
I've really enjoyed creating them. Do you want to talk about any more examples?
Well, I had a couple of thoughts about the creation of magical weapons in RPGs generally.
Okay.
And actually talking about kind of this idea of fate is something that I'm interested in, because I've created a lot of magical items through different campaigns for players. And I have a kind of mixed feeling, because on the one hand, part of what you're attempting to do is create a world that your players can then enjoy, and they have the opportunity to explore and engage with in whatever way they want. And for that enjoyment for them, they have to have a sense that their decisions affect the game. And it's not just the DM or the lore masters forcing things upon them. Part of that makes me think magical items should not be created specifically for players, because they wouldn't be in the world. So they could encounter some cool magical items, and maybe you actually roll them on a random table, and then it's up to them to do what they want. Like, oh, it's not necessarily obvious who this orc cleaving Gondolin axe would go to, but this is what would happen in the world. You find some stuff, and it's not until you take the decision to use it that it becomes important. But I also know that part of the point of the game is to have fun. And sometimes giving the players something that you know they will use and enjoy, because actually we only spend a limited amount of time playing the game, makes more sense. In the very first campaign I ran, I had a dwarven character, played by my brother-in-law, and we didn't get to play very often at all. And I decided I would give them some OP magical weapons just so that we could enjoy the game. And they were totally broken. They were basically dwarven throwing axes dwarven throwing hammers, which would always return afterwards.
Oh, I love that weapon. Yeah, I've used that one.
And I made it specifically for it. So like when they found them, there was no kind of discussion among the players. He was going to get them. I've also made weapons or magical items in Strad when we ran that, which I had an intention of which players would use them, but I never pushed it. So you discovered them, and I knew in my mind they fitted certain characters better than others, but I had to just sit back and let you make the decisions. And sometimes you actually made some quite different decisions. And in that, I'd slightly more embraced making items that are going to... The difference was they were not necessarily items that would benefit you. One of them was actually a cursed item, which actually I don't think any of you found out, other than the player who had it until the very end.
What?
Yes. One of the items was an item. It was a kind of play on the Bloodwell vial that warlocks can get in base 5th edition, where they can basically give themselves sorcerers can give themselves extra sorcery points. But in this one, the blood that you put into it gave Strad a benefit over the party. But you, as the rest of the party, didn't know this had happened. So I created... James's character had it for a while.
Oh,
and James knew all along, and no one else was aware of that.
That's brilliant, James' secret. So curious about these things. I think designing magic items can be really fun. I actually have a book called The Languages of Tolkien's Middle-earth, a comprehensive guide by somebody called Ruth S. Knoll. And in it has like a English to Elvish glossary, and it has some sort of stuff just about languages. It's a really fascinating book. It's got Dwarven, it's got a bit of languages of Ravanian and stuff. And I spent a long time when I was making Elven or the Numenorian weapons of naming them and trying to come up with names that meant something. So Torre Cal was meant to be its web splitter.
Yeah.
Was I think what I was translated as, and I've known nothing about Elvish, so I'm just sort of doing it, and like coming up with phrases people would have to say. So like Brendan's character got a long sword, which was Numenorian, called Glawarin, I think it was called.
Yes, it was very powerful.
It was ridiculous. Yeah, and that translated as sunlight. And he had a thing that I gave him that he could say to activate it. I think it was Lotessier Irun Cal Kalima on Melima Numenor. And he said that like such emphasis when he said it, may the sun shine again bright on fair Numenor. So obviously the rules are really interesting. And we've just touched on a couple of the examples there. But I think there's so much opportunity. You can also add curses, which there's rules for, which I think is really interesting. So Brendan's item was actually cursed.
I think we should put a pin in that, because I think cursed items is fascinating as a topic, and I think it's worth talking about separately, because I have a lot of thoughts about it.
Yeah, I haven't used it that much, and maybe it's a good thing to talk about the rules of and think about in a future episode. But yeah, I think I must have. I'm just looking at my notes on Roll20 here, and there's 30 items I've created, and if you've not got all of them, some of them you didn't find or were never used. And the worst thing you can do is, I think, as a lore master, is like spend ages creating a magic item and then it just sits in someone's inventory and they never use it. So I think, yeah, getting that balance between creating it specifically for them and letting them have fun with it versus feeling like you're directing the game too much is probably the biggest challenge. And I probably erred more towards just giving them the fun thing that character needed. And it seemed to be fine, I think.
I think it's been brilliant. The magical items we've got a huge amount of use out of, which I think is testament to they being the right items at the right time, and they've been good fun. So yeah, it's interesting to see the rules split between the different editions and what's been kept and what's not been kept. And we would love to hear the thoughts of our listeners on what you've used and what you haven't. So you can get in touch. Gmail is thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. We are on X, formerly known as Twitter, I feel obliged to say that, at Fellowship Phase. And if you're not already, you should go on the Adventures Middle-earth AiME subreddit, because it's brilliant. That's not an hour subreddit or anything like that. It's just an excellent place for discussion about Lord of the Rings RPG.
It's really, really good. Final thought, actually, which I'd forgotten to just now, was that I recently watched a YouTube video about the MERP, Middle-earth role-playing game, which is like an RPG from the 80s, I think. And they have loads of modules and settings. And it's a bit more like it deviates from the Tolkien's lore, and it's quite fantastical in its approach sometimes. But there is one module from that which is called Treasures of Middle-earth. And that is a really good module supplement. And it had loads of ideas in it. Loads of ideas for different items. I found that really useful. Yeah, ICE 2010 Middle-earth Sourcebook, Treasures of Middle-earth. And that just had this huge long list of things. And I didn't really use mechanics, but I did go to that sometimes for some ideas about things like the Black Claw amulet or the birch boar of Kimunyor. I don't know how to say that. But yeah, it has hundreds and hundreds of items. So I think I just found that by Googling. So that's another recommendation. Use any source of inspiration and come up with lots of cool things. And yeah, thanks, Josh, for existing. No.
It's my pleasure to be existing. Let's talk about cursed items soon, because yeah, now that's what I'm going to be thinking about.
Well, thanks for listening. No emails except on party business. And comment suggestions and questions to thefellowshipphase@gmail.com. The long year turns to its close. Much we have accomplished these last seasons. Our fellowship disbands, but is not broken, and we will return
on the next episode of The Fellowship Phase.